I'm Dan, and this is 10,000 Hours of Indie, a podcast exploring new music and delving deeper into what goes on in the background of the independent music industry. I'm a musician and passionate music lover, and I wanted to delve deeper into new music in the independent scene around the world. I also saw this as a chance to help artists connect and share their stories, so if there's someone you hear and you want to find out more about, every podcast has links in the show description. Get involved, help this community grow, follow on the 10,000 Hours of Indie socials, you can find all the links in the show description. And also feel free to email me about anything music related, 10,000indie@gmail.com. I'm open to any ideas and love listening to your promos. Darren Hayman is a songwriter who first came to public attention as the frontman of Hefner back at the end of the 90s. I tried to count up his releases, but they are so numerous in number and genre that I'll just say he's prolific. On the 12th of June, he re-released the 2012 album The Violence, a folk album about the 17th century English civil wars and the East Anglian Witch Trials, which I missed the first time around, but this time it's stuck in my head, and after a few false starts, I've managed to pin Darren down for a chat about it and his millions of other projects. Hi Darren, welcome to the podcast.
Hello Daniel.
Looking through your Instagram, it appears that you don't come up for air too often. Are you someone who needs to keep busy?
Yes. I think there's an old school way of thinking of this and thinking that you're wonderfully creative and productive, and hopefully I am those things. I think there's a more modern prism how we see this now, and we see it as someone who's ADHD, which doesn't sound quite as cool.
I definitely fit into the ADHD category myself, so I do understand. You seem to draw influence from everything around you. What is your starting point when creating new music?
A title is sometimes good. A title and an idea for a song, either the sound or a type of song, or a title and a lyrical idea. Oh, that would be a good idea for a song about that thing. So often in my voice notes, there'll be tiny fragments of me when I'm out and about, normally just singing something which might be the title and a little fragment of a tune. And usually when I come back to review them, usually those voice notes tell me whether it's a good idea or not quite clearly. Like it doesn't, a few days later, it's quite easy for me to tell the good ideas from the bad ideas. I tend to write in bursts, and I do tend to write thematically linked records. I think of albums, or at least I think of my albums as collections of short stories. And so once I have a theme in place for an album, then that focuses your mind and you think, okay, what haven't I said about this subject, or what's missing from this record?
There's always been a sort of underlying folk feel to what you've written, regardless where you've been and what style you've actually written the songs in. But how about your musical influences? What inspired you in the early days to think, I'd quite like to sound a bit like that or write a bit like that?
Both of us, both me and you, coming from Essex. And then when I was when I was growing up, I didn't really hear anyone singing in my accent. I mean, I know now where to find them. Now I can hear people sing in my accent, but I wasn't aware of any until I heard Billy Bragg, who is also from the bottom end of Essex. And he would put on his records file under urban folk. I mean, in a way, it's probably a bit of a dick thing to put on his records, but at the time, it kind of excited me. It excited me the idea that folk, I mean, I do like folk music, and I do like, John Fay, Ralph McTell. I love Fairport Convention. I love Steel Eye Span. I love Shirley Collins. But it excited me the idea that folk in its broadest sense could mean something else. It could mean like a storytelling music, and a music that's rooted to place. And I think that's what I quite like about folk music, that it sort of does sometimes date quite badly, that you can do a folk song about a particular thing that's happening in your community to you at a time, and it's sort of fixed in a time and place. So I think that's an influence I take from folk music. I never get asked to play folk nights, so no folk festival ever asks me to play or anything. I think the folk guys think I'm rock. I don't think anyone in folk thinks I'm folk.
Well, actually, that Graham Coxon, another Essex boy, said he found the same thing when he went solo and his first album was all acoustic. He really had to go out and find the people to get included in the folk scene because he didn't know how to do it himself.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know, though. I mean, we're fickle creatures, musicians, and as soon as we're accepted into any club, we immediately don't want to be in it anyway.
This is true, yeah.
Yeah.
It's been almost 30 years since that first Hefner album was released. You've had other bands and spent a long period as a solo artist. What do you think has improved in your way of working and writing during that time? I mean, obviously, it's very different writing for a band than it is as a solo artist.
I don't know, actually. I think I don't allow myself to think that I'm not improving. I don't think there's any usefulness to that. And I think that even though, the trajectories of most careers, I think most of us prefer an early or middle part of most artists' career and think that a career tails off towards the end with slimmer pickings. There'll be exceptions to that, of course. And I've never wanted to accept that. I've never wanted to accept that with age there would be any sort of slowing down or a lack of sharpness. And so I like to think with every year I'm smarter than I was before, and I've learned more. But having said that, I can sometimes listen to old recordings and be impressed or even shocked by something. And usually it's my arrogance. Usually it's my sort of arrogance or bravery. Often when I listen to an old record, I think, God, that's an odd thing to do. Why did you do that? Because, as a person, I would quite like to be liked. I would quite like to be popular. But when I listen back to my old records, I think, God, it doesn't sound like you want to be liked. It sounds like you really don't want to be liked. I mean, there are skills you learn, certainly. I can EQ a snare drum better than I used to, and I'm a bit of a better guitarist. I'm not astoundingly better than I used to be, but I'm a bit better. I have a better vocabulary, and I'm better at picking my words, maybe. But there's an element of chance to it all, and that never goes away. Like a really good song, either 30 years ago when I was making my first record, or tomorrow, still has an element of, I'm loath to use the word magic, but maybe I should. There's an element of chance or, I don't know how that happened. That's really good. And sometimes when it's really good, sometimes you don't even feel intellectually that responsible for it. So,
A side question, because I grew up in the 90s. Now, the end of the 90s was possibly the time at which record labels had the least idea of what to do next. Do you think entering the music scene with Hefner at that time made it more difficult to succeed as a band doing what you did?
No, I think we were quite lucky, really. I think we kind of slipped in as the doors were closing on a band like us. I don't think we were in any way particularly Britpop or anything, but I think that the upsurge in popularity of guitar bands meant that people thought, even with a band as weird and as odd as Hefner, the record company threw some money, not a lot of money, but threw a bit of money at us, and thought that there was some kind of chance that it might cross over. I mean, I think in retrospect that seems ridiculous. And so it wasn't without its ups and downs, and it wasn't without its arguments. And there were arguments between us and the record company, and they did have some stupid ideas sometimes as to what kind of band we could be. But still, the whole experience of Hefner and being signed to Beggars Banquet is still kind of, I think, like a tremendous piece of luck for me. And I think it still is something that my career is still sort of based on. I understand the question, but I think that we kind of we did well, really. I think we kind of navigated a path through it, made some records that were a little bit popular, but still managed to be the slightly odd poor cousins.
There's a lot of 90s bands getting back together to play a few shows. Any talk of that amongst the band members?
We never talk about it, and the answer relates to the question before, really. We were never successful enough for anyone to offer us any kind of money to do it now. If we'd have had like one hit at the bottom end of the charts, then maybe someone would offer us enough money to play it endlessly on Shine tours or something. But we didn't, and so no one does. So it's fine. There's not a big enough temptation to do it. Having said that, I think that if we had have had a few hits, I'd still be harder to tempt to do it than most people. I just always thought that the bands that didn't reform were cool. I just always thought that ABBA were really cool. You know, Clash. I actually hate the Jam, but I will concede that the Jam are really cool for not reforming. And also, like smaller bands, like I always think that a band called Galaxy 500 always remained very special to me in that they just existed for these 3 albums and then stopped. And that was always something I had in my mind with Hefner. I always had in mind with Hefner that don't do too many records. Just hang around for a few years and then fuck off. And then everyone will be really pissed off they never saw you. And you'll stay more special.
So it says in the bio that you are re-releasing your music as your digital back catalogue was in a mess. I can understand that, as the sheer volume must be difficult to keep track of in itself.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, we did manage to do the Hefner records on vinyl a couple of years ago. And there are people that want to do these things. There's a Hefner Peel Sessions album, which I'm dragging my feet on. And people do get a bit cross with me. But it's just always more fun to do a new record. It's always more fun to just write some new songs, you know. In this particular case, though, a guy called Jamie emailed me saying, do you know what state it's in? And sent a couple of pages of instructions of how to improve it. And I said, can you do it? And he said, yes. It wasn't that I didn't care, actually. I mean, it did worry me a little bit. I do realise that one's legacy, I don't know, it's a kind of ugly word in a way, isn't it, legacy? But I did sort of think, in this day and age, what is my body of work if it's not there somewhere? And I know there's arguments for not having stuff on Spotify, and I respect and understand those arguments. But there was something bugging me about a very incomplete and messy online presence, even though I didn't have the tools to fix it.
Okay, let's talk about the re-release of The Violence. I was probably particularly drawn to it because I'm from Essex and understood some of the themes in the album. Tell me what got you interested enough in the Civil War and witch trials to write a double album, and in fact, a trilogy of albums about it.
As I said earlier, I heard Billy Bragg singing and heard an accent similar to mine on records, and that encouraged me to sort of create my own kind of folk music. And so when in Hefner songs, I'm singing in an East London Essex accent, and I'm singing about people my age, people who lived in rented accommodation. I'm singing about my people. But then when I started doing solo records, I did start to write about the suburbs more than the city. And so 2 albums precede Violences. One is Pram Town, which is about Harlow and about new towns in Essex, and another album is called Essex Arms. It's kind of about the car. It's about the car and Essex, and it's about Dagenham Ford, where all my cousins worked. So I'd already started singing about what I often affectionately call the fatherland. But then I guess there's something about my lyric writing which always uses kind of modern vernacular and slang. And I had this idea to write something historical. So if I wrote something historical, what would I do? What would the idiomatic changes be to how I write lyrics? And I saw it as a challenge. So it came the other way round, really. I was sort of looking at Essex and East Anglia's history and I was trying to find an event. So I sort of went looking through history to try and find things that happened here, to find something that might have happened. I briefly thought about writing about that there was big floods in the south of Essex in the 60s, and I was thinking about that, but then I settled on the witch trials. I think the witch trials appeal to me in quite a few ways. There's something about the persecution of others, otherness and outsiders, and I thought there was a lot to write about that. I thought that the big unifying theme for it could be fear. It could be an album about being frightened. I was also interested in trying to write it from the perspective of the victims, and the victims being almost, but not entirely, but almost entirely women. I thought was interesting for me to do because sometimes some of the Hefner lyrics, perhaps I was being a bit of an edgelord back there, and so perhaps there was like a balance to be redressed there.
As part of this release, you've also dug out some more tracks from the vault, some demos, etc. Have you enjoyed rediscovering your older work, or have there been a few things that have made you cringe a bit?
I've been going backwards a little bit anyway because of my Patreon. So on my Patreon, I've been doing album commentaries where I listen to the album and I talk about it. So that had been causing me anyway to go back and listen to stuff. I don't always find it easy. I don't think you're supposed to like your own work. It's kind of a conundrum of what we do, really. The only thing you're trying to do when you're making a record or making a song, I think the only thing I'm trying to do is make a record that I would ideally like to listen to. That's the only way I can make decisions. Does that sound good? It sounds better than that. I'll do that. I'm only trying to please myself. And yet at the end, I will always make a record which I'll never listen to because it's me. And to listen to anything by me is always a little painful, in the same way as most sane people don't like looking at photos of themselves. So there's always a slight ouch about it. And that's almost like there no matter how good it is. I would say that I don't flinch as much when listening to the violence. I think that's maybe because of the things I was saying earlier, because the language is kind of a little distancing. And even though I do sing in the first person on the record, it still clearly is about a bunch of characters and it's somewhat removed from me. I think that makes it an easier listen for me.
How do you decide what goes and what stays when you're adding demos and things like that to a re-release?
I don't know. I think once you decide to go there, I think the fashion's changed slightly. When we were doing 2 CD versions of the Hefner records, I just filled those CDs up until they were bursting. I just made sure each CD, like 2 CDs, were 70 minutes each. Because I was just thinking about what I would want. If I like this band, what would I want? And if I, when it's, I don't know, the Beatles or the Velvet Underground or something, I'm like, just give me as much as you've got. One thing that Jamie's done recently is made sure that the albums, particularly the Hefner ones, are there in their neat 10 or 12 song form. And I must admit, I've realised I'm doing that when I'm looking at other artists. I'm often looking, I don't want the super deluxe 40th anniversary one. I just want to hear the record. So there is a slight trepidation about it sometimes, particularly with the violence, which definitely has an ending, if you know what I mean. It definitely has a beginning, a middle, and an ending. So you want to label them in a way that sort of says, you can take or leave this extra stuff. Particularly also, as it's a double album, it's 20 songs. I mean, anyone could quite rightly say, you didn't seem too discriminating when you put the thing together in the first place, So what expectations would we have of the offcuts?
As we mentioned before, this album was the third part of a trilogy telling factually based stories through song. How much research does it take to write like this, and how much poetic license do you allow yourself when writing them?
Lots of research, and I took it very seriously. I found myself getting very hung up on, say, a detail. So I remember with the violence having a line about a head on a pillow, and then thinking, did everyone have pillows then, or did only the upper classes have pillows, or did poor people have pillows? And likewise, a lyric about a window pane, and thinking, oh, did everyone have glass in their windows, or did some people not? Did they just have wooden shutters or something? And so I could spend quite a long time on details like that just for the sake of a rhyming couplet. I think that the danger is that you become too proud of the research, and the research bogs it down. You're wanting so much to tell people how clever you are and how hard you worked that you might end up doing very expositional, wordy songs that just dump information. I think that in terms of like license, you're in an advantage with being a songwriter as opposed to being a filmmaker or a novelist. Maybe not novelist, because what you can do in songs is you can do the interior mind of the characters. So no one can tell me really what Elizabeth Clark was or wasn't thinking before she was about to be hung, or indeed what Henrietta Maria thought as she was fleeing the country, after being persecuted for being Catholic or something. So that's mine. That's all for me. There's a great Hilary Mantel quote, isn't there, where she says, if Thomas Cromwell did this thing on this day, then in my book he did it on this day. And if he did something on this day, he definitely did that in my book. But if no one knows where he was in the 2 days in between, then he's mine.
Was there anything that you struggled with regarding a particular event when you were writing the songs? Was there sort of one bit of information you did get really hung up on and spent far too long researching, or something you just couldn't find that you were desperate to?
Problem I had with some of the research and some of the books is that some people really like the idea of witches, and some people like the idea of being a witch now, and some people like the idea of a slightly fantasy version of it. So some books are a little bit like, well, were they witches or not? Was there really a dog with a cow's head walking across the room? Who can say? And it's like, well, that's no use to me, because obviously I don't believe that. Maybe I did find it hard to find like rational hypotheses as to what was actually happening. And I think partially through other people's books, but on my own, I came to some of my own conclusions as to why it happened. And I remember thinking about that and thinking about, do I put that on the record? Do I almost like so to conclude what we've learnt today, like song at the end? And I sort of found myself not doing that, really. I found myself, no, it's enough to say this happened. It's enough to imagine what some people were feeling, but I don't think it needs punditry or commentary.
And it sounds like you're doing that in a way on your Patreon when you're listening back to things anyway.
Oh, well, I mean, I could tell you now what I think was happening. I mean, I think that society had no way of supporting women because they would outlive men. So there's no welfare state. And so as soon as women outlived their husband, and that husband was, sowing the fields or doing a job of labour, they had nothing to support them, so they had to beg. And so old begging women were a problem in these small communities. And so someone would come in today and say, shall we get rid of that witch for you? And it was a way of kind of solving an economic problem with these people that were seen as pests.
If you could pick one track on the album for somebody to start with when they haven't heard it, what would be the one you'd suggest?
The song from the record that I play, a lot of gigs, possibly even 3 out of 4 gigs I play, is a song called Impossible Times. It always feels relatable, and it always feels like it could be about the English Civil War, but it could be about last week. So that one.
Okay, we'll move on to social media. I love to trawl through social media and do my real picking at the artist and what they've done. However, I didn't go back very far before I started finding your bird drawings on coasters. So to take a sidestep from the music for a moment, I think these coasters look amazing, and you've also started doing art lessons for this kind of thing as well. What got you into that?
Well, I went to art college. That's really what I'm supposed to be doing. That's what my education was. Lots of the ways in which I apply myself to music come from art tutors. In fact, one in particular I think about quite often. And I think actually sort of art has become a way, because we're all making less money at music, it's been a way to supplement it. It's been a way to do an expensive signature. I don't quite know where that idea came from. I don't quite understand it. I just sort of saw beer mats and saw the size of them. And I like small artwork. And I just thought, oh, they're fun. What would it be like to paint on them? And almost as soon as I thought that, I thought of painting birds on them. But I don't really understand it. I don't understand what birds have got to do with beer. They haven't got anything to do with beer. It's not like a clever conceptual joining of the two things. But no one really seemed to question it either. People just seem to go, oh, yeah, they're quite good. And occasionally I can link them. I can link a bird to a certain brand of beer or a country or something. I've got some good ones right here. These are all from the 1950s, and these are all safety ones.
Are you going to be adding birds to these as well, or?
Well, see, this is the thing. See, sometimes people get a little, oh, you're going to draw over them. And it's like, well, these things aren't valuable. I'm buying these for like £6 for 20. If you want one without my drawing on, you probably only have to spend £2.50. Particularly when I found World Cup 66 ones. So I found World Cup 66 and I would draw sparrows and pigeons and very sort of British manky looking birds on World Cup 66. And I could feel a certain kind of man slightly bristling, like, you're painting on a World Cup 66. And I was like, look, dude, they're not even that expensive. They're on eBay. Just go and get one without my drawing on it.
Let's talk about live shows. All I could see listed for your upcoming live shows is that you have a show at the Comedia in Brighton with David Gedge of The Wedding Present on September the 15th. Do you have anything else planned in the way of live shows?
I'm a little bit out of love with playing live at the moment. I find it a little difficult. I'm not very good at travelling. I find it quite anxiety-inducing. I get quite anxious. Not about going on stage. I'm fine about going on stage, but have I got everything? Have I lost everything? Do I know where the hotel is? How do I get there? Have I booked this, that? I'm not very good at that stuff. And at my level, it does have to be me. I can't be paying someone to do that for the paltry amount of money I get. I also think it's sometimes wise to create some scarcity. That's business speak there. So by just not playing live for a little bit, maybe I'll be able to play smaller shows that are bigger shows when I do play some. But I'm quite fancy having a really quiet year or even a year or two and just not play shows and just kind of see what that does, really. Like, will it mean I'll be really poor or will I be able to survive it? I love recording and I love making records and I love painting. And when I'm dead, that'll be all there is. All there'll be will be recordings and paintings. And what will then it mean, that incredible moment live? I mean, I know it's incredible. It's incredible. Oh, live music's so incredible. Is it though? Is it as good as a record? Is it?
What's next for you? More re-releases and maybe a new album this year, next year, something like that?
I think there might not be an album this year. There might not be. It could still happen. I could still deliver something and something could happen this year. There's several albums being made, but I've got a feeling an album won't come out this year now. I'm making an album of very short guitar instrumentals. The New Starts are making a second album, and I am also putting together an album of my own. So maybe 3 next year or something.
And the final question, what music are you listening to at the moment that listeners to the podcast may not be aware of and should take some time to check out?
I went to see a lady play guitar the other day, and I forget her actual name, but she performs under the name Caroline No, as in the Beach Boys song. And I brought a record off her, and I really liked it. It was really sort of lo-fi and odd and skew whiff sounding. And she was great when she was playing. She was just playing a sort of kid's guitar. So there you go. Caroline No.
So for people wishing to find out more about Darren Hayman, there is the website, hefnet.com, and he can be found on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and Bandcamp. And if you really get into it, you can also check out his Patreon with loads of extra goodies. The expanded edition of The Violence by Darren Hayman and the Long Parliament is available now via Bandcamp and on all streaming platforms. Darren, thanks for your time. It's been a pleasure to delve a little more deeply into your musical mind.
No trouble at all. Thank you very much.